So that must have been somewhere in the October time frame of 2023.
Okay. How long did you have the gun at your home and away from Kathy and Collin's house in Port Charlotte?
Less than a week.
Okay. Why did you have it for less than a week?
Because she demanded that I give it back. She said, it's my gun, you can't have it. And I said, but we discussed with Officer Rentis and Lacey that I would keep it. No, it's my gun, you can't have it. And how do I know Nikki won't use it to kill you?
Okay. So Kathy got the gun back, and
Yes.
so far as you know, she had it with her.
She had told me that she had given it to her next door neighbor Melanie for safekeeping, and then a couple months later she said, "No, Mom, I lied to you. I've had it all along."
Okay. Finally, you had a lot of communication with Kathy on September 7th and September 8th.
Yes.
Right? You also had communication with Collin during that time.
Yes.
Did you allow Collin to go to your house in Auburndale when Kathy kicked him out?
Yes.
And why did you allow that?
Because he's just roaming around the street by himself. Collin told me he didn't have gas in his car. You know, he had like half a tank, that was it. He didn't have his phone. He was using his computer somehow to talk with me. I told him, I said, you have to get to Auburndale before dark because otherwise the gates will be closed. During the day, the gates are open. And go in through the back sliding glass door because you know there's no lock on the back sliding glass door. And I will be there Sunday. Don't talk to anybody and don't leave the house.
At some point, obviously, Kathy, as the jury's heard on some videos, was trying to find out if Collin was actually at your house.
Yes.
When did she finally discover that he was at your house?
I let her know around 11 that night.
On the 7th, so
Yes.
Saturday the 7th.
Mhm.
And how did she react?
She said, you lied to me. And I said, I told you I didn't know if Collin was there. I said, because I don't want you going over there and grabbing him. You just threw him out. Give him some time, give you some time. Let's not have a huge problem associated with this.
And aside from conversations that the jury has heard between you and Kathy over the next hours, did you specifically tell Kathy not to go to your house in Auburndale?
Yes. I said, I will be going Sunday morning. I left first thing Sunday morning. I was going to leave right then, but I was so tired and I have difficulty seeing in the dark that I thought, no, it's better that I wait. You know, in hindsight, I should have gone. But so I waited, I talked to her, she said, no, Mom, I'm going. And that's when she said, I've sold the car, they're gonna come by and pick it up. I said, you can't sell Collin's car, it's his car. No, I don't care, I'm selling it. I'm turning it into his probation officer for not, because he's not allowed to leave the county, which when I talked to the probation officer, I found out that Kathy had told them that I had terminal cancer, so therefore Collin could come and visit me anytime I want. I had to tell the probation officer, well, right now I'm only at stage 3, so no, you know, and I'm only in observation, so I'm not terminal.
Okay.
So,
But you personally told Kathy, do not go to Auburndale.
yes, I told her, I said, when I get back, I will give him gas money and I will follow him there, or we can wait until Monday morning. Let's just wait. Don't go there. You don't have permission to go.
Why did you not want her to go to your house in Auburndale?
Because I didn't want her to start a fight with Collin. I was afraid that she would be combative, maybe go after him with a baseball bat, a gun, something.
I don't have any other questions, I don't think.
Thank you.
I don't have any other questions, but Mr. Levine does.
Mr. Levine?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Dettman.
Good morning, sir.
Ms. Dettman, I know you're going through a lot with the loss of your daughter and cancer and everything else, but I'm going to need to ask you some questions if that's all right with you.
Yes, sir.
Now, today here in court in front of the jury, you've talked about that you were concerned that Kathy was going to attack your grandson, and then you listed a bunch of different weapons. But weren't you more concerned that your grandson, who had killed someone before and had been violent countless times with your daughter, weren't you concerned that he was the one that was going to attack your daughter?
No. He had not been violent countless times with Kathy. Kathy had been violent with him countless times.
Now, a lot of the things you've said here today, you never bothered to tell me or law enforcement or anyone.
Objection, Judge, it's improper impeachment.
Sustained.
Ms. Dettman, as it pertains to your grandson, do you talk to him a lot on the phone since he's been in jail?
Yes.
Okay. Do you do any emailing with him?
I don't email with him while he's in jail.
You
No.
prefer
Just talking
to
on the phone.
Talk with him? All right.
Yes.
And how many times a week would you say that you talk to your grandson on the
I
phone?
usually talk to him 3 times. I encourage him to pray. I ask him if he's eating. I mean, I'm a dietitian, that's what I do. That he's drinking his milk, that he's exercising in his cell, and most important, that he's reading books. And I keep telling him, you have got to pray. You have got to read your Bible.
Now, I mean, this is an obvious question, but you love your grandson, correct?
Yes.
Your daughter is dead, clearly,
Yes.
and she's not coming back, correct?
No.
Now, would you agree that you don't want to see the defendant have to go to prison for a very long time? Is that correct?
I don't want to see my grandson go to prison for something he didn't do.
All right. Well, you couldn't make it any more crystal clear that you're up there and all your answers that you've given have been driven by you believing that the defendant, your grandson, didn't murder your daughter, correct?
I am giving clear answers, sir, as to what happened. I know my daughter. That's why I didn't want her coming that day to the house without me being there. I wanted her to wait the next day so that maybe she could calm down a little bit.
You know your grandson too, correct?
Yes,
And you know his history, correct?
yes.
Now, you say you know what happened, but you weren't there when it happened.
No, I'm not saying that I know what happened. I know the possibility of what could have happened. I wasn't there, so I have no way of knowing. I just know the facts about Kathy, having lived with her and worked with her, even to try to maintain her sanity, to try to maintain that she could keep her job as a teacher, to try to maintain that she wasn't trying to slice herself and kill herself,
Okay,
and
let's-
not coming after my husband with a gun.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Kathy. Now, it sounded like she had some mental problems. Is that correct?
Yes,
Now, you would probably agree that it didn't help that she got impregnated when she was just a child, correct?
she was 13. She got impregnated when she ran away from the Hope House, and they found her in the hotel with her boyfriend. It didn't help that her father called her F bitches and that she was damaged goods, and he didn't want anything to do with her.
Ma'am, it sounds like you're really quick to try to throw dirt on your dead daughter. Would you agree with that?
No, not at all. My dead daughter did the best that she could. We have a problem in this country with addressing mental health. We all know that. And that's what she had. She had mental health issues. At times, she was the greatest person on the world. Very
All right.
intelligent.
I appreciate that, ma'am. I appreciate that. Now, your daughter worked as a teacher for many, many years, correct?
Yes, she did.
And her students loved her, correct?
Yes, they did. For the most part. I mean, as with any teachers, you're going to have some students that, I mean, I'm an educator myself. You're going to have some students that don't. For the most part, yes.
And she cared about her students, correct?
Yes, she did.
She had a passion and a love for teaching.
Yes, she did.
And she taught, predominantly she taught English, correct?
Yes.
And she cared so much about her students that at a certain point, she let one of her students move in when she was married to her ex-husband, Chuck, correct?
Yes.
And then, unfortunately for your daughter, Chuck took advantage of this underage student, is what is believed to have happened, correct? And
Judge, I'm going to object to the relevance of all this.
Approach.
Ms. Dettman, I'm sorry we have to talk about some unpleasant things, but it'll be over soon enough.
Thank you, sir.
No problem. So, do you recall my last question?
Yes.
Uh,
You were asking me why I was spilling dirt on my dead daughter, and I said I'm not. I said I supported her. I've gone into massive debt in trying to ensure
Okay, ma'am.
that she had
I appreciate that, but that was a few questions ago.
Oh,
but-
you're talking about how Kathy ran away from the Hope House and they found her in the.
No, I'm not talking about that either. But if you listen to my questions,
Oh.
Just ask the question.
it'll get easier. So we were talking about your daughter, that she was a very committed teacher and very committed to the youth of her classroom. And I mentioned that at a certain point, she even allowed one of her students to move into the household, and it was believed that Chuck had an inappropriate relationship with this student. Are you aware of that? With a yes or no answer, if we can start at that place, I'd appreciate it. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And you were not a big fan of Chuck as it ended up being the divorce, correct? For how he treated her, from how he impregnated her as a child through the years, being physically, emotionally, and mentally abusive to your daughter. I can't imagine you were a fan of that, were you?
No, Robert was the one that was a fan of Chuck.
Now, ma'am, I understand that you hate your ex-husband.
I don't hate him.
Well, it sounds like you're throwing stuff about Robert in a lot.
You just asked me if I was a fan, and I wanted to tell you who in the family was. I knew Chuck from the
Your
time
Honor.
he was.
Ms. Dettman,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's the point.
Oh.
He gets to ask the questions
I'm sorry.
to elicit the information he's looking for. If additional information is needed, Ms. Thornhill or Mr. Henry will make sure to address it. So just pay close attention to the question that's asked and try to answer just the question that's asked.
I apologize.
That's all right. Mr. Levine?
Appreciate it. Ms. Dettman, as it pertains to your last piece of information that you provided, as it pertains to your husband, he hated Chuck for what Chuck did to his daughter, that being impregnating a little girl, correct?
I'm going to object to the relevance of and to speculation about what Robert thought about Chuck.
Sustained as to relevance.
All right, Ms. Dettman, if I ask you a question that, for your information, just please answer it, irrespective of your feelings about your ex-husband, all right? Now, at a certain point, Kathy got divorced from Chuck, correct?
Yes, sir.
After years of unthinkable abuse, correct?
Yes.
Now, let's move on to a different subject matter. When your grandson lived in Oklahoma with his dad for about 3 years or so, at the end of that, your grandson wanted to come live with Kathy and actually was able to, correct?
Yes,
And Kathy was very happy about that, correct?
yes,
And she felt that she had missed out, understandably so, on multiple years of her son's life, correct?
yes,
And she was trying to fix or make your grandson's life better.
she was trying to improve his lifestyle, yes.
Now, you mentioned you described it as a fight in Port Charlotte where law enforcement came because you said your daughter was beating Collin with a belt and made him do sit-ups and push-ups. You remember that?
I did push-ups, and I took away the sit-ups. It was push-ups and putting the weights above his head and running in place.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Now, you remember talking to law enforcement when they came out there, correct?
Yes,
And giving a sworn statement because you just wanted both parties, your grandson and your daughter, you wanted everybody to be safe and healthy and happy, correct?
yes.
Now, Ms. Dettman, as to the root of what the issue was that night, do you remember telling the deputy that the three of you were at the dining room table and Susan had Collin seated down and Kathy told Collin that she would be implementing new parenting rules and Collin would be having his Xbox, his cell phone, and other items taken away as disciplinary action due to him being disrespectful to her. Do you recall telling law enforcement that?
I remember telling law enforcement about the Xbox would be, I don't know if it was taken away, but it was going to be restricted.
And at that time, your grandson didn't want to hear from his mom, and so he stood up and threatened to fight her and said, let's just do it. Correct?
That was after the incident with the exercising and belt, the beating of the belt. That's when Kathy wanted us to all sit down and eat sandwiches. Like it literally went from one extreme to another. Sit down and eat sandwiches. And then Collin got up from the table and said, let's just do it. And I went to go get my phone to contact Officer Rentis or Corporal Rentis or Officer Lacey.
Okay. All right. Very good. Now, you mentioned that you and your family members love to talk about how violent Kathy was. Is that right?
No, we didn't love to talk about how violent Kathy was. We talked about what we could do to help her. We didn't want her to lose her job. We didn't want her to be suicidal. And more than anything, we wanted her to try to get better.
Did you talk about how violent your grandson was?
No.
And why not? Weren't you concerned about that?
Objections.
Sustained.
Now, you were concerned about where the defendant would live, correct? In terms of who he might hurt, whether he lived with you and your husband, Nikki, or if he lived with Kathy.
My husband did not want Collin to live with us because he said that if Collin lived with us, Kathy would be over at the house and he didn't want to have to deal with Kathy.
Ma'am, didn't Nikki say he didn't want Collin to live with them because he was afraid that Collin might kill you or kill him?
No.
All right, now let's move on to the subject matter of kitchen knives or butcher knives. Do you tell the jury about the time when you noticed that there was a knife missing from your residence there in Auburndale, and you were trying to figure out who stole the knife or who took the knife?
Yes, there was a small knife with a blade like this that I bought in at the dollar store, which is now like the $1.29 store, and and it had a protective cover on it, and it wasn't in the drawer with the rest of the knives and silverware.
And did you find out eventually that your grandson had taken the knife?
Yes.
And he basically told you he just needed it just in case, and did not elaborate on what he was going to do with it?
He said he just needed it.
Now, at that time also, Kathy made it explicitly clear to you that she was afraid that the defendant might hurt her, correct?
Not at that time, it was later.
And there was multiple times when Kathy let you know that she was afraid for your safety and for her own safety.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that a couple of things about the 7th and the 8th of September. You mentioned that Collin told you that he didn't have a phone with him on the 7th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were you aware that he did have his cell phone with him and it was in his car?
So his cell phone had been turned off by his mother. She used to do that anytime she'd kick him out. She'd turn the cell phone off. In fact, it's in the records that she turned it off, and she turned it on, and she turned it off.
And you mentioned that the sliding door, that it had no lock on. Is that correct?
We had adapted the sliding door for a doggy door so Freddie could go in and out when he was staying in Armandale, my acid house. And so it did not have a locking mechanism. You could close the door, but you couldn't lock it.
And so that's how you mentioned that your grandson was able to get into your house on the 7th?
Mm-hmm. Oh, plus the front door was. I don't believe in locks. I've been burglarized, and the burglars got in quicker than I could find my lock. I don't lock things.
Okay. Now, your response when this was going on, when law enforcement made contact with you, was that you didn't know that Collin was a psychopathic killer, correct?
I never said that. Never.
If I may approach, please, Your Honor.
Amen.
And I'm going to show you page 59 of 67 of her statement on September 8th.
Let's see it before you approach.
I'm sorry?
I wanted you to see what he's
Thank you.
referring to before you approach.
Ma'am, if you could just take your time and read the highlighted portion to yourself.
For one thing, I don't use words like stupid, Colin. I would never say that.
Oh,
He
ma'am.
just wants you to
Oh,
read it to
okay.
yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's all right, that's all right.
We may need to go sidebar real quick.
Have you finished reading it?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Approach sidebar, please.